Thank you so much to everyone who's gonna show up or is already here. This is the fifth live Dr. Saleem Ask Q&A session. And here you can ask any questions that you have about Islam, Quran, anything related to these topics, either in Urdu or English. I'll be taking questions in the first come, first serve order. So if I've gotten your questions first as a written question, or if in case we have raised hands, the first person in the queue is going to get to ask their questions first. And we'd like to limit it to one question per participant until we run out of questions, and then we can go for a second round. And so with that, we already have a question. Rafia Khwaja, please go ahead.
Dr. I wanted to ask you, I know that Qurbani is not a farz, it's a nafli ibadat, that I understand. But right now I'm abroad, so I have to give money to one of these well-known charity NGO organization to conduct the Qurbani for me. But what happens is that they at the same time ask me, okay, if you will do your Qurbani, but if you want us to distribute the meat in these countries, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, they are different prices. मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाह रही हूँ कि अगर कुर्बानी का significance is not the meat, so where do I stand? How do I tell them? Because obviously the meat is not to be thrown. So how would you guide me regarding this? Thank you.
I think if they are distributing the meat to any country or to any area, that is the best utilization. If you're outside Pakistan and you're not being able to do Qurbani yourself, then obviously you will be sending the money to any organization, and the organization itself has resources and plans in which they distribute the meat to various areas. So I think you should not worry about that because they are already going to take care of that.
But is it right that the meat has no significance, so we shouldn't care for the meat? That's what I understand.
When we say it has no significance, it actually means it's not the purpose of Qurbani. It's just a byproduct. So the meat can be eaten by anyone. It could be eaten by the needy or the poor. You can eat it yourself. You can distribute it to your own relatives or to your friends. So the significance part actually relates to the fact that it is whether it is charity or not, or whether it is the real purpose of Qurbani or not. So the real purpose of Qurbani, I mean, it has no significance as the real purpose of Qurbani. Meat distribution or meat itself is a byproduct of another ritual in which, I mean, the main ritual is when you slaughter an animal, you pledge before the Almighty that today I'm sacrificing this animal before you, but tomorrow if my own life is needed, I'll not hesitate. So this is a token from me. That is the significance of Qurbani. But of course, because you slaughter an animal, the byproduct of that slaughter is meat. So the meat can be distributed. It could be consumed yourselves. So, and as I told you, all organizations which do such Qurbanis, they have arrangements for the meat to be distributed. So the significance part is actually related to the fact that whether it has any significance vis-a-vis the objective of Qurbani. It has no significance. I mean, it is a byproduct of the actual objective, which is sacrificing, which is actually saying that this is a token of my own life that I am today giving you to make this commitment that tomorrow if my life is needed, I'd be gladly doing that.
So you just pay, if I want to send it to Afghanistan, you pay that amount
of course. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first written question asks, after reading about coherence in Quran, it seems to me that Fikr Farahi is actually a reactionary thought against Orientalist movements against the Quran. It confirms my understanding when I read the responses by scholars of Farahi school who try to justify their reasoning based on the principles of this material world. Is my understanding correct?
How can I say that? I mean, this is what you feel, and this is what you have gathered on the basis of data. Then, of course, you have a right to your opinion. So others might disagree with you, but that shouldn't matter if I disagree with you, because if this is an opinion that you have formed, that it is a reactionary view which has been put forth because of how Orientalists have criticized religion, and therefore, in response, the Farahid thought has come up with something to satisfy them. I would obviously not agree with that, but if you think that this is how it's instituted, then all I can say is that I do respect your opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Our next question asks, the word Yasin has been translated by Muhammad Asad as human in his translation. Does it make sense in accordance with the Farahi theory of huruf mu'aqqata, muqattat?
Muqatta'at, yeah. So
Muqatta.
these huruf muqatta'at, or these abbreviated letters, as we call them, or the isolated letters, as also they are called, they are basically names of a surah. So Yasin is the name of a surah which is called Yasin. Alif Lam Mim is the name of the surah which is called Alif Lam Mim. So this is the reason that they are placed at the very beginning, and you'll find, the construction of this particular sentence would be Hazihi Suratul Yasin, which means that this is Surah Yasin. This is the Yasin Surah. The name of the surah is Yasin. So it's like a heading which is given as the name of the surah. Now, as far as the meaning of the name itself is concerned, we at times don't have clue to those meanings. For example, they have been lost to posterity. But as far as the words themselves are concerned, or these letters themselves are concerned, because generally the opinion of people was that only God knows their meaning. So people have tried to decipher their meanings for themselves as well. And perhaps this is what Muhammad Asad has also done. But the fact is that all these abbreviated letters, which appear actually in 29 surahs of the Quran, they are names of the surah. And what exactly is the significance of what made God keep these names, or what is the meaning of these names? One of the theories which has been put forward by Ustaz Amin bin Farahi, which seems tenable, is that ancient languages always represented certain figures. The parent language of Arabic is Hebrew, and the earliest alphabet of Hebrew, in the earliest times when it was written, it always signified a certain form. So, as for example, the word Jim would be written in the form of a camel, because it was Jamal in the ancient languages, or in ancient Hebrew, that the Jamal would be spelled. So instead of writing Jim, they would write a snake in its place, because a snake is called Jamal. Similarly, the word Noon would be written in the form of a fish, because the word Noon was signified by the form which is called a fish. So the significance that you can see is that at times the names, the way they are mentioned, they are kept on the basis of certain incidents which may be mentioned in a surah. So to continue with the previous example, Surah Noon, which is Surah Noon wal Qalam, which is the 68th surah of the Quran, and you'll find the incident of the fish being mentioned in the surah, in which the Prophet Jonah had been swallowed by that fish, and he had to remain in her belly for a couple of days. So because of the fact that the incident of the fish was mentioned, so the surah came to be known as Noon, because the word Noon signifies a fish. Taha is another example. So the word Toy, used to represent a snake or a serpent. And we know that in this surah, we have the incident of Moses and the serpent, or the serpents turning into the ropes, turning into serpents, or the staff turning into ropes or serpents. The whole incident you can see is portrayed in Surah Taha. So according to Ustaz Amin bin Farahi, the reason that these surahs are named in such a way is that each of these words actually represent certain objects, and these objects at times are brought up in a surah. And it's that he was able to point to certain words which even today exist in this form. But a lot of research still needs to be done in his theory, because as yet what exactly was seen, or what did the Arabic letters seen represent, is still not very clear. Similarly, the word Ya is not clear. So the word Yasin, which is a compound word of Ya and Sin, as yet we are not sure what it represented in the ancient in the ancient alphabet. So people are still trying to find out this, and if they do, perhaps they will be able to come to tell us that this is the way, this is the reason why surah is named such, because such and such an incident or such and such a thing was mentioned in that surah. So what Farahi has done is that he has given examples of the letters whose images, or the images that they would represent, is still known. They have not gone extinct. But because of the fact that this language was an ancient language, so some of the forms which a letter would represent is not clearly known today, or you can say that they are now extinct. So what we can do is that imagine that, yes, these are the names of the surahs, and the reason that these names were kept was that they signified certain things which they themselves represented it as alphabets, and as a result, those names or those things which occurred in a surah became the title of the surah. And the way the Arabs, and of course the Almighty Himself, has kept names of the surah is not that He would always, the name would always reflect the complete content of the surah. So the way Arabs would keep names of their own compositions, of their own literary things that they would compose, would be that would just pick up one prominent thing, something different, something catchy, something attractive, and make it the name of that surah. So the surah would seldom represent the content. It would represent something uncanny, something unique, which was mentioned in that surah. So the Almighty followed suit, I would say, and He also named surahs, because these 29 surahs are named by the Almighty Himself, because these 29 surahs have these abbreviated letters, that He also chose those letters which represented some incident, something which happened in the surah, and then that particular incident was represented by that letter which signified that incident or that event, and it became the name of the surah. But as I said, this is something which is quite plausible. But if you ask me that what does Yasin represent, I'm not in a position to tell you, but all that I can say is that it's a name, and why it has been named as Yasin, I can say that, well, Yasin represented something which is found in the surah, and as a result, the name was kept. What exactly was that? As I said, research is being done by people, and they might come up with the representative of Ya and Sin in ancient languages, and they might not. But the fact remains that even if you don't know the meaning of a name, what you can know is that yes, it is a name, and yes, it has a meaning in which certain events or things or whatever which are part of that surah were somehow depicted by that letter, and then that letter became the name of the surah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem, for the in-depth explanation about these letters. So our next question asks, the Farahi scholars say that there is permissibility of women to lead the prayers in mosques based on Abu Dawood Hadith 591. However, on islamqa.info, it's a website, they have written this as a weak narration, as Abdurrahman ibn Khala is unknown in the narration. Can you please elaborate on that?
So I don't think that that women leading a prayer is based on this narrative at all. There's no, if this narrative is weak, so be it. It's not based on this narrative. That is based on the fact that women have not been prohibited to lead the prayer in any way. So if there is no prohibition in any way, then we are not in a position to say that women cannot lead the prayers. And so people who think that there is a prohibition, they need to come up with the directive which tells us that there is a prohibition. So if something is, expressly, unless it is prohibited by the Sharia, we just cannot regard it to be prohibited ourselves. So you have to show a directive which tells us that women leading a prayer is prohibited. Is there any such directive? So the person who's asking the question, the onus of proof, I would believe, should lie on him.
So they continue with saying that they're unable to understand the principle of assigning a female imam in congregational prayers when it's not obligatory on women. Also, when women are menstruating, they can't offer their prayers, so how can they lead the prayer for men?
So when they're offering, when they're passing through their cycles, why should they lead men? Don't we have a choice? Is it incumbent that we always need to find a woman to lead the prayer? And do all women not pass through their periods at the same time? There could be a selection of people that you can go through. There could be a fact that, okay, on that particular occasion, you don't go for a woman. There could be some other alternative. So you see, one thing is the legality or the fact that something is legitimate. And another thing is that it is not possible. And that possibility could be equally because people don't like it or people are not used to it. So I would respect their views. For example, in a city or a place where generally patriarchal societies, because they are the societies that generally exist, and they would like men to lead the prayers, and it is socially unacceptable, I would say, okay, fine, but don't say that it is religiously unacceptable. Because you see, at times things are religiously acceptable, but they are not socially acceptable. So even then, if we pay due regard to social norms, it's absolutely fine. So you see, when we talk about religion, religion gives us certain choices, and those choices have to be exercised on the basis of wisdom, on the basis of acceptability of certain choice, because this varies from time to time, from society to society, from period to period. If at a place women are not acceptable for this purpose, fine, they should not go for it. But what if there are places in which women are acceptable and every other, I mean, the way they behave and conduct themselves is also taken care of? Then we need to find an express directive which says that this is prohibited.
They also mentioned that congregational prayers are not obligatory on women. Is this a true statement?
Yes, it's not obligatory. It's not even obligatory on men. I mean, to pray in congregation is not an obligation either on women or on men. It's the same for both. So if they pray in congregation, it is very rewarding. But if they don't, whether they are men or women, it is something that will deprive them of some reward, but they would have done their due. So, I mean, I don't know how this could lead to the conclusion that they should not lead to prayers. So as I said, this is basically a cultural thing because culture has invaded our minds so much that we might not find anything in our scripture, but we wish that there would be something because we are so used to the fact that men are leading so many areas that we find women, if they do so, then it would be a misfit. So I think technically or religiously it is fine, but maybe socially it is awkward or maybe socially it's not acceptable. Okay, fine, don't do it. But if there are societies in which this is acceptable, then you have to show a directive from religion which tells us that it is prohibited in all circumstances.
The next question asks, Farahi School of Thought insists that Akbar-e-Ahad cannot add anything to religion. But in this matter, it seems to me that Farahi scholars contradict themselves and go against their own principles and ijma as a whole Muslim community from the past. Please explain if this is not the case.
Again, I think the person who's asking maybe should be reading some of the things that have been written by the Farahi School of Thought. Akhbar-e-Ahad is a separate thing. Ijma is an entirely different thing. There is no such thing as ijma. You'll find worthy scholars telling us that there is not a single verse of the Quran or a hadith or a valid hadith which tells us that ijma or consensus of Muslims it has some authority that we have to obey. If there is an ijma, even the word ijma, if there is no ijma on the word ijma, or there's no ijma on the definition of the word ijma, and there have been scholars who say that person man idda'al ijma faqat kazib. He who claims that ijma has taken place on a certain thing, it is absolutely false because people are so spread out in so many different areas that you just cannot know that the people come up with the same opinion. And even if they do, for example, they have a consensus, then what? I mean, is there any religious authority? Is there any Quranic verse which tells us that we have to follow ijma, or is there a hadith which tells us that yes, there are instances in which scholars have used or deduced from certain Quranic verses or a couple of hadiths, and they have been explained to have an entirely different meaning. So I think people should perhaps read up more on this. And Imam Shawkani, a very celebrated scholar he just lived about 100 years ago, he actually criticized this whole concept and said that it's an innovation in itself. I mean, it's something which is new. It was never there, never ever there in place, never ever recommended by the Prophet or by the Quran that there is something as ijma, that when people gather on one opinion, then no one has the authority to contradict that opinion. There's not a single verse or any narrative which says so. So ijma in itself is something which has no basis. And if you don't agree with this approach, that is fine. You go along with the approach that you follow. You see, what needs to be understood is that people have different opinions on different issues, and if there is something which you find is contradictory to your own belief, you're absolutely fine to think whatever is right, to follow that. And if you feel that other people are not following that, yes, it's a good thing that you ask them that what is the basis of their difference, or even contradict them, or even criticize them. But at the same time, you need to accept that people can have different views and we can still coexist. And difference of opinion is something which is based on reasoning, and a person can easily be satisfied on one reasoning and another person on another reasoning. And our accountability in the hereafter would be on the basis of what I believe and not what others believe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks that Muslims are advised in general to not speak ill of any other religion or criticize or harm them or their holy entities or objects. So in this context, how should we take the actions of Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, when he vandalized or broke the nation's idols?
Mm-hmm. He did an entirely different thing, and it is a misconception that people think that he was preaching. So if he had done this as a means in which he was, destroying those idols because he thought that they were false idols, and therefore he had to destroy them, or he had a divine directive, or it was part of his preaching mission, then this would have been a wrong thing that he would have done. But he never did that. He did it as an action that could lead them to think that what they are worshipping are people who cannot even defend themselves. So it was like it was like something that he wanted to do to make them realize that they are doing something wrong. So you see, the thing that we have to understand is that if he had broken those idols simply because he wanted that those idols would be broken as a result of the fact that they are doing something wrong, then that would have been wrong on his part. What he did was he wanted to lead them to a certain conclusion, and for this he undertook a certain action. And you would see that the Quran itself tells us that when Abraham actually broke the idols, and he was asked why he did do so, he said that these are people these are idols who cannot even defend themselves. And the Quran at that instance says that they did realize this, that yes, he's telling the truth, but their own arrogance did not let them believe the truth. So you see, he even succeeded in the whole endeavor. So therefore, vandalizing those statues was not for the purpose of telling them that you're doing or breaking them because it is something wrong, but it was because he wanted to direct their attention to the fact that they are defenseless things. And that is all. So that cannot be regarded analogous to anything which a person would do to show disrespect to the idols.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I would also, if anyone in the participants currently has any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. Otherwise, I'll continue taking our written questions from the Ask Dr. Saleem WhatsApp group. So the next question asks, can you please explain about the virtues of the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah?
So the virtues of these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah is that because these are blessed days, these are the days in which the people who go for pilgrimage, they are the ones in which they offer Hajj and Umrah, and they culminate on Eid in other parts of the world, and of course on the Waquf of Arafat, which is the actual Hajj. So because of the fact that these are blessed days, these are the blessed days for those pilgrimage, for people who perform pilgrimage, and as a result, this has been extended by the Prophet to other people as well. So if you do a good deed in these times, or in these 10 days, it would certainly carry more reward. For example, if you fast, or maybe if you can offer nafil prayers or do more charity. So it's basically like telling us that just as Ramadan is a blessed month in which what you do, you are rewarded manyfold. Similarly, in the weeks, the day of Friday, or the Fridays itself, is a day which is which is a very blessed day in relation to the rest of the days. So these are like bonuses which God has placed in various times and various periods, so that people can gain more reward and connect themselves more to Him. So these 10 days are no doubt blessed, and as a result, whatever we would do in these days would have much more reward than if had been done in normal days.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question comes from Naseem. Naseem, please go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad bhai.
Walaikum assalam.
I'll ask in Urdu as usual, and you can respond in English.
जी.
मेरे जो मैं कुछ चीजें मैं देख रहा था, जो सूरह निसा की आयत नंबर तीसरी आई थिंक या थर्ड आयत जो है, इसमें पॉलीगेमी के हवाले से बात है. तो इसमें जो मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग हुई अब है, जो मैंने अपना समझने की कोशिश की, वो ये है कि यहाँ पे क्योंकि एक कंडीशनल, एक इस्तिस्ना पेश किया जा रहा है, क्योंकि कुरान की दूसरी आयतों से जो हमें, बल्कि इसी में सूरह निसा की स्टार्ट जो आयत हुई है, शुरू हुई है, उसमें एक नफ्स वाहिद से पैदा किया गया और फिर उसका जोड़ा बनाया गया. तो बहुत सारी जगहों पे सूरतों में ये बात कही गई है कि जोड़े बनाए गए. यानी जोड़े का मतलब ये है कि एक स्पीशीज के जोड़े का मतलब मेल एंड फीमेल, इनकी मैस्कुलिन एंड फेमिनिन जो भी है. तो कुरान का जो प्रिंसिपल है वो तो यही बता रहा है कि एक बीवी ही असल ये है कि आप एक बीवी के साथ जो है आपने जिंदगी गुजारना है, अनलेस के कोई इंसिडेंट हो जाता है, कोई तलाक हो जाती है या मर जाते हैं, वो एक अलग बात है. लेकिन यहाँ पे जो है तादाद अज़वाज का मसला, लेकिन मैंने ये देख रहा हूँ कि यहाँ पे बात यतीमों की हो रही है. तो मेरी समझ में तो ये बात आ रही है कि ये वो बात हो रही है कि कंडीशनल आई तो कहा गया कि उनमें से अगर तुम्हें इंसाफ नहीं कर सको, यानी कि जो मोरालिटी आ रही है, यानी कि अगर वो जो बेबाप की बड़ी लड़कियां हैं, बालिग लड़कियां हैं, या उनकी माएँ जो बेवाएं हैं, आपने उनको अपनी कफालत में लिया है. अब जाहिर है एक डिग्निटी एक है, तो वो अगर आप जो है वो नहीं इंसाफ कर सकते हो तो 2, 3, 4 आप उसको अपने निकाह में लेकर आ जाओ, तो वो एक डिग्निटी के साथ आप उनकी कफालत आप जो है कर सकोगे. लेकिन जो जमूर जो राय है, जो उलमा की, बड़े बड़े उलमा सब की, वो इसको इससे काट कर ये बात कहते हैं कि ये आप जो है वो अलाउ है 2 करो, 3 करो, 4, लेकिन आपने जो है उन्होंने एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगा दी अल्लाह ताला ने कि 4 से ज़ायद नहीं हो सकती, यानी कि कहीं किसी से भी कर सकते हो. तो आप ये फराही मकतब फ़िक्र इस बारे में क्या समझ रहा है, क्या कहता है कि ये वाकई यतीमों के बारे में है बात, या ये कि 4 की इजाजत है, आप कर लो? आप इसके बारे में क्या आप कहेंगे?
What has happened is that we need to understand the background. Polygamy was in vogue in practice in Arabia before the Prophet himself, and people would marry for various reasons. And these reasons included the fact that they wanted an extra spouse, or because they wanted an extra spouse, they would fall in love with someone, or it could be the fact that they wanted more children, because in those times children were the real defense, and they actually showed that whether a person is rich or not, because tribes being defended by your own family could have been possible if you had more people at your disposal and nothing better than your own children. So polygamy was in vogue or in practice for various reasons ever since earliest instances that we have in mind in history. So by the time things reached the era in which the Quran was revealed, it happened that wars took place and people became orphans, young boys and girls became orphans, and women became widows. So the Quran said that you marry for various reasons. So if you marry for various reasons, then there's another cause for which you can marry, and that is to take care of these orphans. So it is not that the Quran is making orphans a condition for marriage. All that it is saying is that it is a pre-Arabic custom. It was always there. Had it been initiated by the Quran itself, then yes, we would have said that polygamy is dependent on the fact that whether you're marrying orphans or not. But this is not the case. It was always in place. It was a pre-Islamic practice. So the Quran is just telling Muslims that you marry for various reasons, and one of the reasons that you should marry is to look after orphans and to look after widows. And if you do so, even then you must pay their meher, their dowry. You must not go beyond 4, and you must be just to each of these. So these are the conditions which it imposes, and as a result, if you marry for any other reason, by analogy, we also say that yes, they should not be more than 4, and yes, you have to be just between each of the wives, and yes, you have to pay the dower as well. So the approach that we adopt here is that polygamy was something allowed, and the Prophet himself then took lead for that. So he married 2 widows, Salama and Hafsa. Hafsa is the daughter of Hazrat Umar. She got widowed in the war in the Battle of Uhud, and Salama also got widowed. So the Prophet, when he read these verses that Muslims should take lead and marry widows so that they can take care of the orphans, it was like an appeal which the Quran made. So the Prophet actually responded to this call by marrying Hazrat Hafsa and Hazrat Salama, because both of them were widows and they had children to be taken care of. So what we need to understand is that the Quran is not making orphans to be a condition to marry their mothers. It is just telling us that there are various reasons for which you marry, because this marriage was a pre-Islamic custom. It was a pre-Quranic custom. It was going on. And the Quran was just telling them that you marry for various reasons. Okay, that is fine. But there is another reason for which you can marry, and that is for the welfare of the orphans and the widows. And when you do so, don't go beyond 4. And even for this noble cause, you should not think that you can be unjust or have bias towards one wife. No, you should be in a position to be just to all the wives, and you should also end up paying dowers, because don't think that if you're doing something out of virtue, then that would discount the dower or the money that you are required to give, which is called meher. So this is the background, and so therefore, my submission here is that it's not that the Quran is telling men or Muslim men that they can only marry if the welfare of the orphans is at hand. All it is telling them is that this is another cause for which you can marry. So it's like appealing to them that marriage is something which you already do. So if it had been something which was conditional on orphans, the Quran would have said that we'll stop marrying people for other reasons, just marry them for this reason. That it didn't do. And also, polygamy was not something which was initiated by the Quran. Had it been the case, yes, he would have said that the Quran is telling us that only because of orphans you can marry. Because the fact that the Quran was that polygamy was a pre-Quranic custom, it was already going on. The Quran did not stop it. It just added one more option, and that is that if you marry for other reasons, fine. This is another reason for which you can marry.
नहीं शहजाद भाई, मैं इससे मुतमईन नहीं हुआ, क्योंकि वहां तो एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट जो है वहां पे यतीमों की बात हो रही है, यहाँ पे ये जो है एक इस्तिस्ना दिया जा रहा है, शायद कहीं और किसी जगह पे ऐसी बात जो है कुरान ने नहीं कही है। तो वो जो आप कह रहे हैं वो ठीक है, वो मामला उस वक्त की जो सोसाइटी थी उसमें ज्यादातर जंग में लोग जो है रहते थे, कबायली सिस्टम था, मर्द लोग ज्यादा जो है उसमें जंगों में काम आ जाते थे, औरतें ज़ाहिर बेवा और यतीम हो जाते थे, तो वो तो ठीक था, वो मामला ठीक था, जरूरत थी उस वक्त। लेकिन आज में जो ये लॉजिक देते हैं जो उलमा इस बात का, वो कहते हैं कि औरतें कम पैदा होती हैं, लेकिन ऐसा कोई केस नहीं है। औरतें तो इससे तो ये इनिशिएटिव मिल गया।
I'm not giving any logic.
एक मिनट, मुझे बात मुकम्मल करने दे कि अगर ये मौका मिल गया उन लोगों को जो कि अपनी अर्ज, जो उनकी अर्ज है, जो सेक्सुअल अर्ज होती है, वो ज्यादा उसमें जो रिच हैं वो ज्यादा शादियां करते हैं, और फिर जो बेचारे जो नहीं है उनके इसमें अफोर्डेबिलिटी, उनके पास वो नहीं होती बीवियां, फिर वो नहीं जो है कर सकते, क्योंकि औरतें और मर्द तो तकरीबन एवरेज बराबर हैं इस वक्त दुनिया में। तो ये जो बात आ रही है यहाँ पे तो कंडीशनल बात आ रही है, वही कॉन्टेक्स्ट चल रहा है। तो ये आप कैसे इसको कह सकते हैं कि वो बात मान ली मैंने कि वो उस वक्त सिस्टम था, लेकिन आज तो नहीं हो रहा है ऐसा, आज तो नहीं हो रहा, लेकिन इसको तो ऑल द टाइम के लिए, हाँ अगर किसी वक्त किसी एरिया में ये बात सिचुएशन हो जाती है कि जंगे होती हैं, मर जाए हो जाते, तो ये अप्लाई हो जाएगी यहाँ पर।
What I'm saying is that I'm not offering this logic at all that women are more in number and men are less in number. This has not been mentioned in the Quran anywhere, and this is not the basis of polygamy. Polygamy was conducted in the pre-Quranic society for various reasons. It could have been one's personal urge. It could have been that people would wanted to support someone who had passed the marriageable age. It could be because they wanted more children so that they could have a standing in their own tribe. So for various reasons, polygamy was already going on in Arabia. So had polygamy been made conditional to just the cause of the orphans, the Quran would have said something like this, that this is the only cause for which you should marry. It never said something like this. It says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَىٰ وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ, which says that if you are not, people are getting orphans in those times because of wars. If you're not able to do justice with them, then you marry their wives. So the custom of the polygamy was something which was always there in Arab society, and it was not just wars which became the reason for people marrying women. As I said, there were various other incentives. So the Quran never stopped them from those incentives. It just told them that you marry for various reasons. Now, this is one more reason for which you should marry. So anyway, as I said, this is how I understand, and you have every right to differ for that in understanding.
क्योंकि एक जगह और भी आयत में इसी में आगे जाके कहा गया कि अगर तुम्हें एक बीवी से जो है अगर तुम्हारा नहीं मामला हो रहा है और कुछ चीज उसकी बुरी लग रही है तो पहले तो एडवाइस किया गया कि उसकी कुछ चीजें अच्छी भी होंगी, लेकिन फिर ये बात कही गई कि अगर वाकई ऐसा वाक़ा आ जाए तो तब्दील करना चाहते हो तो फिर उसको फिर बाकायदा जो तरीका है फिर तलाक का मामला है, वहां पे ये बात तो नहीं कही है तुम जो है दूसरी शादी कर लो, तीसरी कर लो, वहां तो ये बात एक बीवी से दूसरी तब्दील की जा रही है.
Well, that has a different context. It is just says, "In aradtum an istabdala makanan zawjan makana zawjan." If you want to change another wife, then this is how you should do. Which means that if you would like to marry another wife, divorce one wife, and take another wife, then this is how you should proceed. So that has nothing to do with polygamy at all. It is just telling you that if this is the case, that you would like to divorce one wife and marry another wife, then these are certain norms that you need to follow. So you see, we need to find that there has to be an express forbiddance of polygamy. There is no such forbiddance in polygamy. What the Quran is telling us that orphans because of wars, they were orphans. So if you would like to sort of look after those orphans, it's difficult to look after an orphan because he has a mother, or she would have a mother, the orphan would have a mother, and it was always difficult to sort of take care of orphans when the mother is someone else. So the Quran has given this option that if to look after the orphans, you marry their mothers, so that it would become easier for you to look after those orphans.
ये बात तो आपने बात ने मेरी बात की तायद हो गई ना कि आपने कहा उनकी मदर से शादी कर.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. They have to marry the mother.
वो तो ये है ना कि आप वो तो एक हदीस के बेस के ऊपर लेते हैं ना कि आपकी नजर खराब है या आपके दिल में चोर है और
No, not at all. Not at all. This is not the reason. This is not the reason for that.
नहीं, जो बुखारी हज़रत आयशा रज़ियल्लाहु अन्हा की हदीस से जो बेस लेते हैं जो लोग इस आयत की तफसीर करते हैं.
What you are doing, Naseem Saab, is you're mixing up various things, various opinions, and making sort of a pudding out of it. We've never said that. People who use that narrative or they adduce it on the basis of narrative, they should be asked why did they use it. As far as our approach is concerned, it's very simple. What we say is that if polygamy was something which was initiated by the Quran, please mark my words, if it was something which was going to happen for the first time in the era of the Quran, then yes, these verses would have meant that only in cases of orphans you should marry. This is not the case. Polygamy was already in vogue, in currency, before the Quran was revealed. So there had to be some other verse which first would tell us that, well, stop that practice for other reasons. Now you can marry only for this reason. This never came. So the understanding is that that people would marry, and the ideal family would of course come into being through a single pair of man and woman. But for any reason that you would like to marry more than one wife, it could be various reasons. So the Quran just is telling us that this is one of the reasons that you should also marry. You marry for your own tribe, you marry for your own need, you marry to have more children. Okay, but this is another need, because in the society today, people are getting orphaned, and it is best to look after those orphans by marrying their mothers. So the Quran is telling us, this is just adding one more option. It's like an appeal that it is giving to people who were in those times and appealing to them. And as I said, the Prophet himself actually came forward and he married Hafsa and Salama anhuma for precisely this reason. There was no other reason than to marry because of this fact.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Rahbiya Khwaja. Please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, I wanted to ask you, I've heard that the Quran has mentioned that when you marry more than one wife, you can't love all of them equally. Then if you can't, you can give them equal time, but giving one equal affection is not possible. So then how does it allow you to marry four wives? If you can't give them equal love, then one wife would be more disturbed than the other if she doesn't get the same affection.
Because, I mean, you need to understand that the Quranic verse which relates to the fact, which relates to that affection is not talking about affection. Affection is something which has to be given equally to all wives. What it says is that if you love one wife more, so it says, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ وَلَوْ هَرَسْتُمْ. Even if you want, you cannot love all your wives exactly the same, because love is something which relates to your heart. I mean, you can love more wife more than the other, but the rights of every wife, which includes time, which could include the pocket money that you give her, which could include the affection that you have, they have to be equal. So the rights which a wife has should be equally given. But as far as the intent of the heart is concerned, or the inclination of the heart is concerned, the Quran says that when the Quran is allowing the fact that you should have justice between the wives, it is not telling you that you have to show justice in loving them as well, because love is something which is not governed by justice. Love is something which is governed by your own internal attraction, or maybe affiliation or affection for a particular soul. Yes, the rights that they have, which include, of course, marital rights, which include rights in which you have to treat them in a way that your outward behavior with them is the same with all the wives. That is where justice is required. So this particular verse that you're referring to is actually referring to the fact that your own inner affection or your love for a particular wife, justice is not required in that love. And the Quran says you cannot do it even if you try. وَلَوْ هَرَسْتُمْ. You try as best as you can, but loving someone more than the rest is something which is beyond you, because it occurs naturally. But yes, giving them equal rights is something that you must do, because that is something over which you can have control, because that is not governed by emotions. It is governed by intellect and purely analyzing the fact that those rights must be equally administered.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. So our next written question asks, in Quran, an incident is mentioned according to which Prophet Sulaiman killed the horses who caused him to forget about offering Asr prayer. Both Javed Ahmed Ghamidi and Amin Ahsan Islahi said that he was preoccupied with emotions. One shall not extract a general ruling from this incident, but they praised it a lot. My question, so the participant's question is, no matter how pious is the person or whatever their intentions are, why is it justified to kill an innocent being for one's own fault?
First of all, he never killed any innocent being or a horse. The Quran never says that. The words which are used by the Quran, they actually imply that he was so overcome with the embarrassment and shame that he had missed the Asr prayer, that he thought that it was the horses who, because he was examining their parade, that actually were the reason. So it was like he just tried to sort of have a wave at them, and he actually wounded a couple of them. So it's not that he started killing them. He wounded them, and that wounding or that injury that he inflicted it was not out of any aggression or any anger or anything else, but by the intention or by this shame that he had, that why did I miss my prayer, and why was I so involved in these things, in these parades, that I just forgot to remember God. So basically it was an emotion driven from the love of God, from sincerity. Obviously it was not the right thing, and that is why he immediately realized and he stopped doing so. But it was like being overcome with this frenzy of shame and embarrassment, and he started to, as I said, inflict injury. But the way the Quran has described the incident does not at all mean that he ended up killing some of them. Yes, he did end up injuring some of them. That does seem the case. But then he immediately realized that he's doing something wrong, and he withdrew. And the reason that he's being praised for that is that because he was intent. I mean, the intent was that he was so ashamed of missing the prayer, and this feeling of shame for missing something which is an obligation is always something which is liked by the Almighty. He always likes people who repent. But of course, that repentance should not be a cause of injury and harm to other people. So the praise is for that. And for this, this was something that he could not, I mean, come to grips with. He could not stop himself. So the injury in itself was driven by something else, but of course it could not have been condoned. And therefore, I think as soon as he realized it, as should be the case which is mentioned in that particular surah, he withdrew. And I'm pretty sure because the Quran does not describe the whole incident, he must have taken care of them. He must have taken extra care of them. He must have tried to call all those horse keepers who are in a position to cure a horse. And he must have been very, very ashamed of not only the fact that he missed the prayer, but also the fact that he ended up wounding those animals. So because the Quran does not picture the whole incident, you feel as if this is what he had done. No, because the purpose of the Quran in depicting that incident was to tell us that how penitent, how repentant a prophet of God is when he misses an obligation. So that was the purpose. So that only that part of the incident has been highlighted. Otherwise, as I said, it is just common sense to believe that he must have realized immediately, and he must have gone to great extent or to great lengths in redressing the situation, in having those wounded horses taken care of in a very, very fine way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Rafia Khwaja, please go ahead. And we're nearing the end of our time, so I would please request a concise question. So, because we still have a few more written questions to get through.
Dr. Shehzad, I'm just a little confused when you say you can love one wife more than the other. Obviously, you will show your love for this wife in front of the other wives. So it doesn't really then just becomes justice. Then the other wives would feel neglected. And also, if you're going to bed with all the wives, you can't just do it like an automatic machine. So love has to be. Shouldn't it love be equal, or you just say don't marry 4 times?
You see, humanly loving someone equally is not possible. I mean, we love one of our children more than we do at times another child of ours. Just ask ourselves. At times we love one sister more than another sister, because you see, love is something which you cannot have any control on. So people who get married, should know this even before that. I mean, women who get married should know this as well, that if they are marrying a husband who has more than one wife, then he would be ending up maybe loving more wife more than the other. But what he would not be doing is disregarding their equality and rights. So the external rights would be exactly equal, but the inner affection that has to be, I mean, taken care of even before marriage. And they should know this, that maybe one of us would be more taken. I mean, when I say more taken care of, I would refer to the fact that she would be more loved by the spouse, but certainly not that the rights that a wife would have would be infringed upon because of the fact that he loves one wife more than the other. So the rights that he has on others is like given equal time, given equal expenses regarding within their needs, and similarly things which relate to their rights. So women have to understand this as well, and men also, that the restriction is on having them giving equal rights. The rest is something which is on your hearts. I mean, it is dependent on your heart's inclination, and you cannot have that control over yourself. It would be simply inhuman. And had that been made a condition, then it would be a virtual impossibility.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next written question asks, and this is a question about extramarital consensual sexual relationships.
Right.
So there's a husband who engages in consensual sexual relationships extramaritally. And once the matter got exposed, that shattered the wife, but she chose to not divorce him because of social and economical facilities that the husband has been providing for her. On the other hand, the husband's been really remorseful, and he's sought forgiveness from Allah and the wife. And so the question here is if there is any role of the state in such private matters which remain amongst the people or the parties involved after such an act happens, because there are people who keep telling the husband that anything bad that happens to him is because of his sin, and the wife is constantly counseled by her circle that this is an unforgivable sin and that she cannot forgive him. So what's your opinion on this matter, and is there no redemption for this person? And then there are other little related questions, such as, is zina a criminal offense in Muslim jurisdiction? And I can ask you these in turn.
Right. So you see, a person who is convicted of this practice, this illegitimate practice, if he repents and the law doesn't, I mean, if he's not exposed to the law, and as the questioner just said, it remains between people, then this is actually the will of the Almighty, that such a sin should be covered up. It should be hidden from the eyes of the public, because if a person is remorseful, then of course that would mean that he would not like to continue with that, and he's absolutely penitent, and he would like to lead a pious life. So people who think that if some calamity is coming upon them because it's an unforgivable sin, or that God is still holding him accountable for that, I mean, they need to show this from the Quran, because the Quran does not tell us that it's an unforgivable sin. It is, yes, when a person is convicted on the level of the state in which he becomes a nuisance or she becomes a nuisance, and the matter is reported to the state and the punishment is given. It is then you can tell the people that yes, that is a case of conviction, and therefore the Quran has said that for such people it's a great sin, and on the day of judgment also they would be taken into account. But when a person repents and he is, I mean, not subjected to law, he is not apprehended by the law, he feels that remorse, he gives up that bad habit, then in my understanding, the Almighty is already waiting for such a person to come back to him so that he can forgive him. This is the mercy of God. So I think the wife should rest assured, if there are trials and tribulations and circumstances which are stringent, it is certainly not because of the fact that they were doing something, or he was doing something bad earlier on. Trials and tribulations have their own reasons as well, which we can have discussed several times. So I think that such a person who has repented and not indulging in that practice, inshallah, hopefully, would have been forgiven by God for that. And they should move on in life, move ahead in life, start a new life maybe, and just forget about what happened. It might be a nightmare sort of a thing, and try to get over with it and just be themselves once again.
Thank you very much. The second part to this question asks, so it's, in this case, it's not necessary for the husband to confess in a court and ask for a punishment.
Absolutely not. Certainly not. This is not what I think in a previous session I was just referring to a narrative of the Prophet in which he said that in which the instance was that a pious person or even a normal person was guilty of this, and someone came to the Prophet and said that well, this is a person that I'd like to report, and the Prophet said that I wish you had hidden his sin, because you're now exposing him to the society, and once that person gets exposed, his reputation is permanently damaged, and he's known as a fornicator or an adulterer in the society, and that virtually is curtains for his reputation. So it's certainly not the Islamic way that in which you confess a sin before people. It's just enough that you confess that sin before God, try not to do it, indulge in it in any way again, and be a person who is pure and pious in his marital relations, and that is enough.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The last question says, and it's more of a comment, but I think they'd like some guidance, is that they say that they just turned 80 and they come from a sensible religious family, but they're losing their interest in namaz and Quran. And they say they do pray 5 times, but they do it mechanically, and they listen to Khalid Zahir's Khulasa on Quran more out of fear of God than love.
Okay, so you see, prayer is something that there are certain tips that can be given to make the prayer more interesting and more involving and more engaging. So I'll just refer to a few of them. So first thing that perhaps they should do is that when this is the case, they just start afresh, make a fresh start, and start just offering a single prayer, one prayer, and that too the farz, the obligatory rakat, and they don't offer the nafil. And the second effort that they should make is that they should try to understand whatever they say in the prayer. And the third thing that they can do is that they should know that except for 5 instances in the prayer, there are areas in which you can pray in your own language. So if they are praying in Urdu or English or in Persian or in any other language, they have that option within the prayer, within the structure of the prayer. So the 5 instances that they must say the prayer in Arabic, or the 5 utterances, one of them is Allahu Akbar. Whenever you say it, when you go down and you get up and you prostrate, you say Allahu Akbar at every change of posture. So Allahu Akbar has to be said in Arabic. Then Surah Fatiha has to be said in Arabic. The Quran part that you recite after Surah Fatiha has to be in Arabic. These are 3 instances. The fourth one is Sami Allahu liman hamida, which you recite when you get up after kneeling. And finally, when you end the prayer, you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So these are the 5 instances that have to be offered in Arabic. The rest, for example, the whole of Attaya, starting the prayer when you say Subhanakallahumma, kneeling, prostrating, sitting between the 2 prostrations, all of them, you can make any dua, any dua that connects you to God, any dua, and in your own language, which of course is closest to you. And because of the fact you know that language, you can express in a very comfortable and a very soothing way. Finally, you also need to understand that at times you don't have the chance to pray because maybe you could be in a market, maybe you're in a car, you're going somewhere. So the Almighty has given us this option that we can pray while being in a car, while traveling, and even walking. The Quran says rijalan, which means you can, if you're walking on foot and the time of prayer has arrived, you can just pray through your actions. It's not just because you're not able to pray, but because if the time of prayer has arrived and you are just strolling around, you can offer the prayer. Similarly, rukbana, which means that you are on a transport, maybe on an aircraft, maybe on a bicycle or a motorcycle or a car, you can offer it within the car. And if you don't have wuzu, in such instances, you can do tayammum, because you see, you're traveling, you don't have water, you can just do the tayammum or the dry ablution. Similarly, you can combine prayers. The Zuhr and Asr can be combined. Maghrib and Isha can be combined if you're traveling, or maybe you're not in a position at times. Maybe you're in an office, maybe you're busy with some activity. So, and finally, I would also say that if you're able to learn some more parts of the Quran slowly, then that will add variety to your prayer, because generally we just learn by heart a few surahs of the Quran, and we keep on repeating them ever since childhood. So slowly add more surahs to your repertoire, to your reserves, so that you can read or recite those surahs when the time comes in the prayer. And of course, you have a meaning of that as well. And finally, also think that when you're praying to God, you're thanking Him for His favors. And if you realize the favors that He has on you, being given a normal body, having some health, the fact that you have been given a reasonably comfortable life, all these are favors of God. So when you pray to God, you're actually acknowledging His favors. Look at this world. When you are in this world, whenever someone gives us a gift, we would like to thank him or her and return the favor. So imagine that God has given you so many gifts, you simply cannot return the favor. All that you can do is you can kneel and prostrate before Him and thank Him. So it's a token of our gratitude when we pray. And if you realize the amount of favors that you enjoy, you would immediately wish to thank Him by praying. It is a spontaneous thing, just as it is so spontaneous that when someone gives you a present or a gift, you would like to immediately return Him with a better gift. We cannot return God's gifts. But if you realize that these are the gifts that you are enjoying, then you would immediately like to thank Him. And because expressing this thankfulness and gratitude has been prescribed by Him, that you do so by praying and by sharing whatever God has blessed you with, you'll find a tremendous urge in yourself building up that as soon as the time of prayer arrives, I should stand up in prayer, because this is how I'm thanking God for so many things that I enjoy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We're right on time too. So this is the end time for our session. There were a couple of questions that were asked during today's previous session, and so those will be asked in the next Islam Study Circle.
Okay, inshallah, we'll see each other next month in this session. And until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.